It's been a few weeks since we did any giant races, so I decided let's get back in there with some big boys. This week we are looking at Mekone, the Brazen Giants, a very fun, interesting nation that has some kind of unique limitations, but I think can still excel very well. Let's take a look. Mekone is a city of gold and marble inhabited by Gigantes, a race of exalted giants descended from an ancient god. Proud and endowed with mystical strength, the Gigantes of Mekone have enslaved their neighbors and made themselves rulers over men. For ages, the Gigantes have watched the lesser races and seen their kingdoms rise and fall. They witnessed the fall of the Telkines and the injustices done to the races of old. With the aid of the elder Cyclops, the Gigantes of Mekone have taken upon themselves to rid the world of the gods of men. Most of Mekone's population consists of human slaves, helots, and the population of human slaves is discontent, and unrest will increase in all forts. So these guys are like, hey, bad things keep happening to like everybody, and it's all the gods' fault. So let's kill the gods. Either that, or maybe they're just really into like JRPGs and they just want to reenact any of those plots where you always end up having to kill God. Either way, they are pretty well equipped to make the attempt, you know. For our military, we have few Gigantes armed with magical weapons. We have mostly human slave soldiers, and we have no sacred troops. That's a pretty big departure from most nations. Magic-wise, we are very strong in fire, earth, decently strong in air, and pretty weak in water. I think generally speaking, you can expect some fire 3s, some earth 3s, some air 2s, and only water 1s. We also get Cyclops Smiths, which are excellent. Our priests are few and weak, but we also have Inquisitor. If we look at Inquisitor, the priest is very efficient when preaching against other faiths. The priest level is doubled for this purpose. So if you go to an enemy province and you preach, there is a conflict roll that happens there, and this will make this guy act as if he is a holy 2 instead of a holy 1. A pretty good bonus if you aggressively use priests to push back enemy dominion, or maybe you're getting pushed really hard and you can use that as kind of like a stone wall to stop enemy dominion and give yourself a second to try to push some more out. We don't have blood sacrifices, so this is our only stopgap measure if you found yourself in that situation. Our dominion has a conflict bonus +1, which relates to that role. When your dominion and an enemy dominion are both pushing, one of them's trying to enter the other's province, there's a conflict roll that happens, and that's based on the amount of candles and the dominion strength, I believe. This will give you a +1 to that roll. This is a pretty darn unique bonus. There's very few things that have a conflict bonus, so having a strong dominion, despite the fact that we don't have any sacreds, could be useful for aggressively pushing your own dominion out, or if you take a weaker dominion, this helps you just not get pushed back yourself as much. So I think either way you go, this is a pretty good little bonus. For our scales and blessings, we get a +1 order limit. Pretty good. We're going to look at a mechanic here with unrest, so you probably want to strongly consider order. For buildings, we get advanced fortified cities, and our forts increased unrest. So let's take a peek here at one of the forts. So this is a fortified city. We have very expensive infrastructure. I believe it is 1,200. Let me find somebody out and about who can build. Yeah, 1,200 gold to build your first level quote-unquote fort. And then it's 800 gold for the first upgrade and 800 more for the second upgrade. However, these are very strong. Administration 50, recruitment point bonus 150%, quite good. Our defenses are also pretty strong. We get some of our discus throwers on the walls, which are pretty good. They're kind of sort of like giants throwing rocks. Pretty darn nice there. You're definitely going to want these advanced forts because we have very expensive troops with the ones that we're going to mostly want to be using. we're going to need tons of resources, we're going to need tons of recruitment points, we're going to need tons of money. So we need tons of infrastructure. You can see in this game, this is where I started. I built 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm getting 6 over here, and if I hadn't just won the game, I'd be building on the other throne. I built a lot of forts because we'll delve into this with the units, but we have some limited recruitment, and so more forts mean more of the units we actually want to get. Spamming those out, but they're not cheap either. So like, I don't think I would want to like surround my capital with forts because you wouldn't be able to afford the units for the resource direction. So it's important we take land, we take decent land. We're looking for high income, high resources. We really want to own good land. We do not want to be in junky, low pop wastelands if we can help it. We want to be in high pop farmlands with mountains and forests and things that are giving us bonus to resources, mines, anything like that. For our starting sites, we have the City of Gold and Marble. Gives us our recruitment of our 2 cap onlys. Increases recruitment limit by +4. We'll look at that here in a second. Gives us an air gem, an earth gem, and we have the Forge of the Cyclops, which allows us to recruit our Cyclops and produces 2 fire, 2 earth, and 150 resources. Quite good sites here, I would say. We need those resources. We need that recruitment bonus. Definitely going to help us out. Jumping into units, like was mentioned, we kind of have a pretty heavy divide between our giant troops and our human troops. Let's go ahead and start in on the human troops. This is actually a very important unit, the Helot Peltast. What makes him good? This is a slave unit, so very, very cheap. If we take a look at his cost, he costs 3 gold per year per guy. So 100 of these guys only has 300 upkeep. There are mages that have more upkeep than that, and we would have 100 of these. In addition, they have a mechanic called promotion. If they gain enough experience, which I believe is 50 XP, denoted by the promotion 50, they jump up into a more experienced unit. Generally speaking, things like that are kind of interesting. However, here the stats don't really go up enough for it to be useful. You end up you lose slave and you increase their price. So ironically enough, you really don't want them to get promoted. You would rather that they stay super duper cheap. As just a generic unit, we have a bog standard human chassis. He's wielding a bronze spear. He has 2 javelins, and he's running out with leather gear with a wicker shield. That contributes to, despite the fact that we have a pretty full kit, he's only 5 resources. So 8 gold, 5 resources, 4 recruitment points. You can pour these guys out if you need to. And having mass javelins is a pretty decent strategy for killing certain indies. Barbarians come to mind. If you can get that critical mass of javelins, oftentimes you can cause a rout on at least one of the barbarian groups as they're running towards you. Next up, I want to look at the Periosi Pelotast. This is like the big brother of the previous one. He's wearing the same equipment, not a slave. He's up to 8 gold per year. So you can have almost 3 of the other ones for the same price as this guy. And I believe the precision stat is exactly the same. Let me double check myself. Yeah, totally worthless. Totally worthless. Yeah, he has a little bit better morale, but you're going to be running around with taskmasters anyways. So you'll end up with as good or maybe even better morale on your slaves than you will on these guys. I would not get these. Next up, we have 2 versions here of hoplites. We have the Helot Ekdromos and we have the Helot Hoplite. The Ekdromos is the lighter of the 2. It is a formation fighter. It is a slave. It has the promotion mechanic. Again, we have the very low morale, but you're probably leading them around with taskmasters. Remember, you are a formation fighter, so you're going to need a lot of these guys to fill out a front line because they're going to be 4 to a square. Equipment-wise, a bronze scale cuirass with a hoplite helmet. Hoplite helmets are very good, and the hoplon is a very good shield. Pretty decent here. He ends up with only 11 protection because mainly being let down by that chest piece. But remember, you do have a very beefy shield that you're going to block quite a bit with. So between that and having a length 3 weapon, they're surprisingly survivable, actually. Otherwise, human stats, remember, for slaves, very cheap on upkeep. These guys are only 3 gold a year. So same as my comments about the Pella stats. Very, very cheap. You can get so many of these guys out. However, I like these ones more if you can afford the resources. The Hilot Hoplite. We've gone up to a bronze long spear, so now we're at length 4. So now we're starting to talk about being able to repel people who are using normal spears. That can be pretty handy. And as formation fighters, we're going to be very tight. We're going to have a lot of attack density. Our damage and attack aren't particularly better. It's just the length that went up. However, our protection has gone up quite a bit. We went up to a bronze hauberk, and otherwise same equipment. The hauberk is a very protective piece of gear. Note our encumbrance has gotten relatively high. We're up to 9. However, that's not too bad. We have 4 people per square, so attacks that are incoming are going to be pretty spread out. You won't have one guy hopefully get focus fired. Protection 17 is in the realm of weaker troops are going to struggle to get through that, and that's if they get through your poking them with repels. Very good troop. For some nations, this could definitely be like your strongest front line. But not us, because we are descended from the gods, Gigantes, and we have much better. Let's take a look at the Disco Bolus. This is our ranged giant troop, and he's very interesting. I tend to not use them too much. The Bronze Discus only has 4 ammunition, and he's not, he's okay. 12 precision's okay, but it's very long range, so it's maybe not as accurate as maybe you think. The damage is great, though, if it does hit. You get these on your walls on forts, and they're pretty deadly. When you do fort battles, you also have extra ammo, so that helps them out quite a bit. If you do get into melee, you have attack 12 fists for some reason, and you do 19 damage. And this is totally unbuffed. So, interesting there. Our giants are also very, very proud. We would not be led by some short guy. We only want size 6 or higher, or don't even talk to me. Minimum leader size. So you have to have a size 6 leader, which essentially for us means our giants, in order to lead them. This is a unit that I think they're usable. I think they would love to get some buffs. And we do have good earth access so that you can get them some protection. With a little bit of protection, I mean, even going in with rank 0 fist, depending on what you're fighting, that's not terrible. You could go beat up like a monolith or something with these stats. Not the worst thing ever. This is our first unit that has the limited recruitment. You can only get 3 per turn in a fort. Now remember, our capital has that recruitment bonus, so you could get 7 of them in your capital. Turn off my main recruitment. So if I go above the 7, even though I have plenty of stuff left for recruitment purposes, I can only get my 7. Now that doesn't apply between different units, so I could get my 7 of these, and I could get my... But now I'm out of resources, but in theory I could get 7 of these. So very important that you're using your limited recruitment. You really, really, really want to get up to at least 7 of, I would say, these guys as soon as possible when you start. Next up, we have the Gigantes Ekdromos. This is kind of our lighter of our 2 melee giants. We have that same size limitation for leaders. We are a formation fighter, so we can have 2 of these guys per square, which really helps them out. Normally size 6 is quite the disadvantage, but with formation fighter, we can stick him in there. You also can have your human formation fighters filter in and help fill in the holes if need be. We are a skirmisher. So remember, if you are a skirmisher, you do not have the morale penalty for being in skirmish or sparse line. Why would you want to do that? Maybe you sparse line these guys and you have your humans in front of them, and then these guys are large enough at size 6 that they can push humans out of the way. So your human lines connect, and then these guys will kind of squeeze their way, push their way up to the front. So if you're limited on your number of these, but you want to sprinkle them in your front line, that's how you can do that, and they don't get the morale penalty. Kind of interesting. You don't see tons of people with skirmisher, and you don't have tons of people where you're going to have size 3 front line and size 6 front line together. So kind of interesting there. I really like the push forward mechanic. It really helps out your large, rare units get to the fight, but not be in front and focus fired right away. So I do like that mechanic quite a bit. Gear-wise, we have golden spears on our giants. These are similar to the golden spears we saw in like Formoria or other nations like that. Very, very good. They're magic weapons. In this case, this is a length 4 because of our size. Attack 14, so great attack value here. and 25 piercing damage. So these guys are going to hit things, and with piercing, they're going to get through most protection. I mean, at 25 damage, even a really high pretenders running like 26 to 30, you can get through that. With a couple stabs, you can make it in there. Defense-wise, he's only running with 16 protection, which is on the lighter end of heavy troops. That's kind of a weird way to say that, but he is damageable. He will take damage. He will take chip damage. These have some attrition. If we move up to their bigger brother, though, the giant hoplite, now we're talking really heavy. This is a very heavy unit. 30 HP with 21 protection. This is unbuffed. We're wearing a gleaming hauberk. What's interesting about all this gear, by the way, is it's magic, which gives it protection against destruction. So destroy armor, things like that. These are protected against that. It's much, much harder to break their armor off with magic. Using a gleaming hauberk at 18 protection, we're sitting at 21. And while 7 isn't low, this is lower than our human encumbrance. They're running around at 9. We're only at 7. So very powerful troop. You really, really want to get 7 of these out from your capital every single turn as soon as possible. And you want to get more forts so you can get your 3 per turn in those forts. An amazing unit. With these guys being led by a giant leader, I would say 7 might be a little on the low side. 14 might be a little on the high side for an expansion party, but somewhere in that neighborhood, every other turn, you could be sending out a fresh expansion party, and they can take on most indies. And if you have a place that's going to give you trouble, you just combine 2 together. Or maybe you throw in some human troops like the Pelistat to just be extra bodies to soak a charge, to throw your javelin into the barbarians before they charge your giants. Very, very good. Remember, at size 6, we can push our way forward into the front line, so you can put something in front of them to soak charges, but still ensure that these guys will get to the front and get stabbing. Very strong troop thing. This guy's a bit of a stinker, but everyone else I do feel has their place. This is your main focus in the early game, but even these guys can be interesting. A front line of these guys is pretty darn solid. And with a great helmet, a great shield, okay protection, arrows aren't going to chew them up or anything like that. Pretty darn good. Moving up to commanders, we have the Periosi Scout. Bog Scanner Scout, basically. He's got Mountain Survival, he's got Forest Survival, 50 Stealth, 35 Gold's fine. Nice to have just a cheap scout. Moving on, we have the Neodemode Commander. This guy is a bit of a letdown, unfortunately. He does not have Taskmaster, so you're not going to want to be leading your humans around with him if you can help it, because his leadership's not going to give them any morale bonus, so they're going to be running around with like 7 morale. That's begging for a retreat. Begging for it. You could use these guys to ferry around some troops or maybe build a fort or something. I would just get an indie commander to do either of those things. I wouldn't waste fort turns. I would much prefer to have a scout than one of these guys. Next up, we have the Locos, I think. These are pretty good. Only 115 gold for a giant commander wearing 21 protection with 32 HP. They're only 1 recruitment point too. So if you have to grab one from a fort, you can grab 2 of them. And I mean, the resources are very high, but other than that, cheap troop for what he is. He's Formation Fighter, and he's Taskmaster +2, and with his leadership, he gets an additional +1, so that's going to take your slaves up to a 10 morale. Not good, but way better than a 7. Otherwise, he's wearing our standard gear from our heavier troops, so he's fine fighting. If something gets to him, he's not going to instantly just crumple over and die. One interesting thing you could do with these guys, we have air access, so you could give them true shot bows. They have very strong strength at 21 and a 11 precision. And the true shot bow gives you extra precision on its shots too. So these guys could stand in the back and lob some relatively precise, high damage shots over the front line if they're stuck behind troops. And you're generally going to leave them on probably stay behind troops. So pretty good. I have had instances where I give these guys a couple bodyguards, put them on my flanks, and then say hold and attack rear, and use them as flankers even, because they're just so survivable, just kind of as a distraction type thing. Pretty good. Next up, we're moving into caster people. I'm going to start with our cap-only guy, the Pole March, because he is also a leader, and he is a very good leader. He has 170 normal unit leadership, and that gives him a +2 and he is a Taskmaster, so now we're talking at a +4 for those slave units. This is an incredibly strong unit. He is cap only. He's not slow to recruit. He's expensive, though. 415 gold, 79 resources. Good HP, great protection, wearing our magic kit. He's running around with a God-slaying spear. A length 4, attack 16, 28 magic damage, and we have Bane of Heresy, which we do fatigue damage to gods and sacreds. And it's an area effect 1, so you don't even have to like hit a specific guy. You could do it to a whole square. Bane of Heresy is very strong. How often is that going to come into play? It can. It can. I mean, you often run across armies that are heavy on sacreds. And if you do, that's a great bonus to have. In addition, he has great thug paths. We have Fire 2, Earth 2. So we can boost ourselves up to 3 in both of those just by going up Conjuration a little bit for Phoenix Power and for Summon Earth Power. With those pathings, we can buff our own protection. With Construction Magic, we can temper armor, and we like to do that because we're wearing tons and tons of armor. Of note, you also can throw on a Bracer, and that will get buffed by temper armor, so you can really skyrocket this protection. We also can turn on Flame Shield. Flame Shield is very important for large, relatively unkilly sacreds or thugs because it allows other things to attack you and at no fatigue for yourself take damage. So getting Fire Shield up is pretty important for these guys if you want them to try thugging. They are sacred. However, note they're not a priest, so they cannot bless themselves. So if you're going to take a bless that helps them, you're going to need somebody either to bless them or you're going to need to bring a flask of holy water. And to get the flask of holy water, you need to have some water magic, which is a little bit tricky, actually, to get on your Cyclops. You only can random into it. If you do, however, my opinion, it's well worth it to ensure that these guys are taking your bless if you're taking something, which you may decide not to since you don't have any sacred units, only sacred commanders. But if you do, make sure you have a way to bless these guys. They're formation fighters, and they are combat casters, which is relatively rare. Combat caster is pretty darn good, too. With these paths, you could do, like, Flaming Hands, or you could do the, what's it called, Iron Punch or whatever, which is a very killy earth spell. Earth Meld's another great one. Fire Bonds is another great one. It's pretty rare ability to have combat caster. Now, unfortunately, you do have to watch out for encumbrance and fatigue on this guy. He's at 7 normally. If you could get him some gear that helps with fatigue or maybe take a bless, he would really appreciate that because he could quite wear himself out. Spellcasting encumbrance is 7. Very strong unit, though. In addition, we have a national spell that you can cast on one of these guys at a time that gives them quite a strong buff. It's definitely worth doing. So keep that in mind. You'll definitely want to use some of these guys. Next up, we have our caster lineup, starting with the Garante. The Garante is a priest 1. He gets a 1 random of a fire or an earth. If at all possible, I actually try not to recruit this guy. At 58 gold per year, he is efficient. He meets that 10 gold upkeep per 1 research thing. However, I feel we have better choices, and our other choices can actually do things in combat for us. This guy does have our Inquisitor bonus. He is a Taskmaster. He can lead some troops around. No, he does give a +1, even though he's lowish on numbers he can lead. So in an emergency, he could lead some troops around. 145, though. I mean, at 145, I would much rather take one of these guys. He's 30 gold cheaper. He's a better leader. He's going to probably get more kills, frankly, than him. Also of note, I believe he has a special tag that makes him come in at old age, even if you take the unaging bless. So right here, you can see he is old age. I do have the unaging bless in this game. And if we check these other guys, I think they're all going to show in here. Yeah, but if we go out and look at some that are actually in the field, did end up old. They barely get underneath the criteria, so yeah, he just starting. Well, he's a few over it. So Keep in mind on these casters, you are going to have old age, and take that into account when you're looking at their stats. Next up, we have the E4. This is my preferred cheap researcher and early caster. 1 fire, 1 earth, 1 holy. He is sacred. His random is of fire, earth, or air. So if you get either of those, you're up to 2, which is a perfectly fine battlefield. You can self-buff yourself up to 3 and do just fine. The airs are a little more iffy, but still good for sight searching. Early on, maybe you have to make some Alquills and you don't have a Cyclops yet. There are some small buffs that you can cast with air for especially ranged units. They have their uses. I prefer the fire or earth on these guys. 11 research for 94 gold is great. Pretty good unit. In addition, these guys are very special to us. Every year in the fall, we're going to have an event where basically the Giants just decide to kill some humans in every one of your forts. If you have one of these guys in your fort, at the beginning of fall, the event will spawn, unrest will rise some. Then, if you have these guys, the event will progress in fall 2, where you go around and you murder a bunch of your population and humans and reduce unrest by basically just total like authoritarian iron grip control. And then in the fall, we will get a special assassin giant spawn. But the only way that that will all take place is by having one of these guys in every fort. And as one of our mechanics, remember, unrest increases in our forts. So it's very useful, and I would say you just need to do it. One of these needs to be in every single one of your forts forever. So maybe that's a use for those air guys that aren't going to be in combat. Just spread them out, put them in your forts, and keep that event rolling. Next up, we have the Archon. This is a very good combat caster. He gets air, earth, and fire at +2. So you're looking at fire 3, earth 3, or air 2. All of those are great paths, very usable in combat. We are a priest and we are sacred. Now, we finally got to the point where it's probably not good for a researcher. 13 research for 172 gold, and these guys are slow to recruit. But these guys are not cap only. So every one of our forts could be working on these guys, and you're going to want them. This is good magic. Fire's great for the offense. Earth is great for buffing our own troops. You're really going to want to get temper armor, get the protection buffs, maybe even buff strength, especially if you're using your human troops. They would really appreciate the strength buffs, and it doesn't hurt to give it to your giants either. Very important mage, a great mage. Very good. You want to try to get these guys. They are expensive, so you're going to need to get your economy rolling before you can really do it. But you're going to want to. Next up, let's look at the Elder Cyclops. We've seen very similar on several different nations. This one is Fire 2, Air 1, Earth 2. We can random into any of those plus water and a 10% for an additional one. If you get a water one, remember that that's going to really help you craft some things you'd like the Flask of Holy Water. I rolled, I think, 6 of these guys this game, and I never got a water one. So don't count on that, you know. Fishing for randoms can be iffy. All that being said, he also is fire resistant. He has Master Smith, so his paths count as 1 higher for the purposes of being able to craft. Very, very good there. Notice he doesn't have a reduction to cost, but you can easily make Dwarven Hammers. Each one of them can. And we have a resource bonus of +25. So if you have forts that can't at least get out your 3 limited recruitment giants, I would try to get some Cyclops out to those forts and buff your resources until you can at least get out those 3, because being so good but so limited, you really, really want to get every single one of those that you can. Very good, very expensive. He is slow to recruit. He is cap only, so keep that in mind. Finally, we have the Basilius. He is our other cap only, and our strongest mage and strongest priest. Fire mage level 2. He does guarantee water, so he's probably going to be the guy that has to sight search for some water gems. Earth 2, and we can random into the same plus air, 10% same. Very strong mage. He's guaranteed to be useful because we can always buff ourselves to fire or Earth 3. The air magic isn't terrible. He would allow you to get some of the air buffs out, although less useful. We're not really an archer nation. We can get out fire arrows. We could put that on our pellistats and do that, but the ammo's so low, I don't know. I don't know if that's worth it. Again, he has 17 research. but 194 upkeep per year. And as a slow to recruit cap mage, you're not going to get tons of these guys. They are your best priests, but you don't need the huge blesses, so you would mainly want that for Sermons of Courage, which with our slave troops they would really appreciate. That would help them get up to 12 morale, which would make them much less likely to retreat. Very nice, very useful. Okay, so overall, we have great troops, and we have a spread between very, very powerful and very, very cheap. We have limited recruitment, though, so we have to make each one precious and take care of them. They're very strong, but limited. So we want extra forts so we can increase their production. We need resources so that we can get them out. We want to use them to expand aggressively to get good territory to fort, but we also don't want to throw their lives away. Losing 7 of these guys is a very painful thing. Losing an entire expansion party, very expensive. I mean, you are losing, let's say you lost 10 of these guys, 400 gold and 750 resources. Be careful. They're not invulnerable despite how good they are. They're not invulnerable, so take care of those giants. We have fire and earth magic in good amounts, so we have strong leaders there. Who would I prophetize? Generally speaking, I would actually do a Locos. He doesn't normally have anything to do standing behind his troops, so it's not like you're taking away from his caster role or his combat role to do it. If I didn't want to do one of him, I would try to do it probably on one of these guys, the more expensive mages, to knock down their cost. Do note that we don't have any other Holy Threes. We don't have high enough water to do Bishop Fish shenanigans. So whoever is your prophet is going to need to get out and claim thrones for you. Keep that in mind. So I had one of these guys, and I gave him flying boots so he would have extra movement. And it did become relevant. Like in this game, I had an early war with Yomi, because it was a good matchup with my magic weapons. I took this throne, and while that had been happening, I was in a major war with Muspelheim over here, and I had tons of armies, and I rerouted a couple of them to grab these 2 thrones. I was sitting on these thrones, forting them. The same turn, I was capturing this. So I had to fly, I think it was like fly, 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 fly. So I was across the world to be able to get here with my prophet. Try to pick something that's going to allow you to be somewhat mobile, because you never know when you need to grab thrones rapidly for a win. As for national items, we have 1 national item. We can forge our God-slaying spear. This is a pretty dang nice weapon. As mentioned on the pole march, these are powerful. Attack +2, it's a length 3 weapon. Remember, giants will make that into a length 4, and it has the Bane of Heresy, just like we saw in the unit. And all for the cheap price of 5 Earth Gems. If you're running a Dwarven Hammer, 4 Earth Gems. Pretty good. I don't know if I would bother forging this. Maybe if I was summoning in some other commanders that didn't have magic weapons, I would consider it. It's not AoE other than the Bane of Heresy, but it is a good weapon. I could see using it for things. At enchant 0, we have Blessing of the Godslayer, which grants us 5 attack, 5 defense. We're always blessed. Halt Heretic 7, which is a special type of awe. So sacred units would have to pass a 7 awe check against this unit, and they gain inspirational +1. Note you do need a Basilius to be able to cast this. Well worth it though. This really juices up your pole mark. You can only, however, have 1 at a time. So this isn't a everybody can get this. Very powerful though, well worth casting. In enchantment also, we have Sow Dragon Teeth. We've looked at this on other Greek-inspired nations. It is a good combat summon. For 2 earth, which we can easily get, you can pop out 10 of the Sparte units, which are very strong unit. Will you need to do this? I don't know. You're going to have other units that are pretty good, but could be handy in a pinch to be able to do that. In Thaumaturgy, we have Gigantomachia, which is a global enchantment. Note it needs 4 earth and 4 fire. That's somewhat difficult for us to do. The highest natural that you can kind of sort of count on would be a 3 earth, 1 fire, or a 1 earth, 3 fire. So you're looking at doing some empowering, a lot of crafting, or designing a god to be able to cast this. It is 60 earth gems. Earth gems are not too bad for us to get. This is an interesting one though. Recruitment limit in friendly domain +1. That means in our capital, we could be doing 8 of each type, and in our forts, we could get 4. That can be quite powerful. A 30% increase in recruitment of your best troops is very strong. Our Dominion gets a +3 conflict bonus, so now we're up to +4. Our Dominion is going to really push other Dominion. I could see temple spamming and just dom killing people if you get this up. We also get Mekone and later on the Fregrons. Giant recruitment cost is lowered. That does help. I mean, you're probably set up to be able to afford them anyways, but, you know, every bit of savings is another troop we could recruit. So pretty good there. Otherwise, in Conjuration, we have the Greek-inspired ones. We have our Hound of Twilight, our Procession of the Underworld, Bind Carries, and we can actually take a look at those units. We've checked them before on other nations, but here's our Sparte. These are the combat summons. They have the magic weapon, which is pretty interesting for a combat summon. Very strong unit to get out on the field. The Cur is an interesting unit. If you do awaken them, then they have blood magic and death magic, I believe, and maybe nature. I don't generally play games long enough that becomes relevant, but this is a way you could break into something else. They have Ghost Running Claws, which paralyze undead units, which is kind of interesting. Storm immunity, they cause unrest. Interesting unit. I don't tend to get them. Do note that we are not set up to summon Cares, Hounds of Twilight, or Lampids natively. We do not have death magic or blood magic. The Kolkataros is a bull. He's a trampling size 8 that spits fire. We can do this one natively. Could be interesting. We're not really a trample nation, so people might not expect that. Most people don't bother with this. It comes out of construction at construction 6, which is pretty awkward because, like, you're going to want 5. We're good crafters, but are you going to go to 6 just for him? I don't know. You would get Legion of Steel, which it would be nice because it's an entire battlefield buff. That might actually be worth it on this nation. We do run around with very heavily armed troops that can be a little difficult to get buffed because they just take up so much space on the battlefield. And it would also give us Forge of the Ancients, which would help with our crafting. I could see it. If you did go with a Earth Astral God, you also could do Golem Construction, which would break us into Astral. That could be kind of handy because we do not otherwise have access to sorcery paths, which is a bit of a weak point for us. Okay, so let's bring all that together. We are a nation that has very strong troops combined with decent, cheap troops. We have good magic in 2 different paths and okay magic in a couple others. The fire magic and the earth magic can also be combined to do the lava magic stuff, depending on your pathing, which can be pretty powerful there. We have some thug ability mages and leaders that could be pretty useful. Cheap scout, good at crafting. I think this is a nation that would like to do some thugging. We don't have a sacred unit, so if you're going to take a bless, you're looking at a mage bless or a thug bless for your pole march. We have some national spells that we're not very good at casting, but a global that is very powerful for us. I think if you wanted to make your pretender with the idea that he's just going to come in and cast Gigantomachia, that would be totally fine and useful. We have some interesting Dominion play with the Inquisitors and the conflict bonus. So I do think it's a nation that could be interesting to go for some Dominion plays and try to dom kill people. Could be pretty interesting there. We have limited recruitment, so we have to be careful we don't throw armies away. Very careful on that. Many of our commanders, the mage ones, come in old, and very old at that. So an unaging bless or maybe an undying bless, or not undying, half-dead bless might be useful. Something to keep in mind there. That being said, let's take a look at pretenders. In this game, I ran with a Statue of Fertility. It was dormant, so I did not start with my bless out. It's hard to get pole marches out in the first year anyways, and you'd have to have a pole march plus somebody to bless him. That'd be quite an expensive expansion party. I just went with Unaging and Regeneration. we don't have an easy way to get regeneration otherwise. So regenerating pole marks are very, very tough. Regen helps your mages just from some random damage that they take. And the unaging, if it doesn't outright get rid of old age, it lowers it so you're not nearly as old. I didn't have anybody get diseased in my entire run this game. Nobody had old age problems with this, so I think it was well worth it. This did get me Nature 7, so you could do like Gift of Health, you could do other big nature things. However, it isn't a mobile, so it's hard to get enough nature gems. I didn't find a nature indie until I took Yomi. For some reason, Yomi's capital had an indie nature mage. Now that I think about that, I don't know why that was the case, but I had a shaman there. So I didn't end up able to use my nature magic other than my blessing. Scales wise, I went with 3 order to help with that unrest issue that all of our forts have. You can patrol that down, but just remember when you're patrolling, you're killing off population. Unfortunately, the order of operations, you do the unrest reduction, then the unrest is added. So you'll never really get it down to 0 in your forts, barring some certain circumstances. I like the order. It also gives me extra recruitment points and a little bit of extra money, both of things we want and need. I went with 2 production because you definitely need to have tons and tons of resources. Don't count on just building Cyclops. They're slow to recruit, cap only, and they only give you 25 resources. Some of our units are using like 75 resources. You'd have to have 3 Cyclops in the fort to be able to afford one of those guys. So you really require production. I would say this is required basically for this nation. With just neutral heat, neutral growth, I had to pay for things. I needed 1 magic so that I could get unaging, and I paid for that with 1 misfortune. Combining that with order to lower the number of events worked out just fine. I didn't have anything too miserable happen this game. I like this guy. Definitely not your only choice, though. You definitely could run with other things. We don't get the largest selection. Note that we have no Dominion 1s. We do not respect humans at all. We're not interested in that. We need to kill their gods to save them and the elder races from themselves. So the lowest you could take would be a Dominion 2, basically expander monster. You do have the Tolkien God King, which is kind of interesting, although I don't know how useful it would be on this nation. You could do the Eldest Cyclops if you really wanted extra crafting ability, but you can you can recruit Cyclops anyways. I would only take this guy if you're interested in the productivity scale to take that up to 3. I could see that being kind of useful. As for full Titan chassis, we do get the Great Archon. He has the Alchemist bonus if you like transforming gems into gold, which apparently I do because we do that all the time on stream. And he also gives an Inspiring Researcher bonus. So we are a nation that does have some variety of research goals from different pathings we'd like to get. He ups our magic skill limit, which could be interesting. And he does have decent pathings for us. So you could go with that Earth, Astral, and summon in golems with him. Could be kind of interesting there. We have the Demi-Lich, which is the classic, everything is cheaper and better on a Demi-Lich chassis. He does get only a 20 new path cost, whereas most of these other things that we have, 80 down here, 60 up here, 40 here. So he is your cheapest rainbow type thing, I believe. I don't think anyone else has anything cheaper than that. As for immobiles, we have a small selection. Do note the Bronze Colossus is not immobile, but you pay for it drastically. I could see things that do non-blessing required. I don't know if I would do larger on this nation. Maybe, I guess it would only really affect your pole mark for your melee type guys. So possibly, but things that don't require that. Unaging, larger, heroism, could all be good because you don't have to worry about getting a blessing out for them. Otherwise, I would look at maybe, here's another guy that can do extra order and production, but remember the order doesn't stack, so you'd just be getting the production. Fortune Teller is not bad. He is a disease healer, so if you didn't take unaging, maybe this guy in your capital can help keep some of your old mages alive by getting rid of their diseases. He has Inspiring Researcher. Could be interesting there. Overall, I don't think you require an expander. We expand so well with our troops. What we really need is scales that are good enough to be able to get our troops. And then beyond that, I think it's to flavor. You could go cheap like I did here and just take a cheapy bless that is good for the pole march. You could go with a bigger bless, but I don't think you want to overspend on that. You're going to want something that's good for mages and your leadership without overspending. That all being said, though, maybe you do want an expander, and you have some of the classic good ones here, the Drakon, Golden Lion, Earth Serpent, Myrmicolian, the Bowls, plenty of things you could do here. If you wanted to do some of your national spells that you're not otherwise able to do, the Hound would help you with that and could still expand. Yeah, I think it's just him, really. I don't think I would go with the Immortal Gorgon. Could be interesting. Decent selection, although because we don't get the Dominion 1 guys, it looks more limited than maybe it really is. Pretty good. All right, so I'd love to hear what people's thoughts are on Mekone. I think they're a very interesting nation. They are a nation that makes it all the way through the ages, although they have a pretty bad time of it. This is our high water mark, I would say. If you want to go out god slaying, Mekone is your nation. Leave any comments below on god design. I'm really curious on that. Like I said, I went pretty simple with just the regen and unaging this game. However, I wasn't able to use the nature magic at all. So that is a pretty strong limitation on doing something like that. Otherwise, I'm happy everyone tuned in and checked out Mekone, the Brazen Giants. If you've enjoyed this and want to see some more of them, check out the stream that will be upcoming, and leave a like if you enjoyed making it all the way through this video. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and you will hopefully get notified of more Dominions and other content coming. Otherwise, take care of yourself, builders, and I will see you in the next one.